Radical Pedagogies is a research project led by Beatriz Colomina, an architecture historian, with PhD students at Princeton University School of Architecture. Beatriz surveys radical strategies of architectural pedagogy, asserting that the discipline can be best changed by revolutionizing the way it is taught. Architecture was trying to find its identity in a time of disciplinary instability. So with their research, they tried to question, redefine, and reshape the post-war architectural learning. Rather than reinforcing these scholar techniques, radical pedagogies shake the foundations of the discipline by revisiting those experiments that made huge impact on the architectural field. It was a period of collective defiance against the authority of institutional, bureaucratic, and capitalist structures. The question of architecture's socio-political value, in light of its evident complicity with capital, came to fore and generated forms of debate or pedagogical practice in institutions. The premises behind the Radical Pedagogies project is the hypothesis that if in the 1960s and 1970s there was radical design, it was also because the educational system was radical. The research is not just a pedagogy in the school, but in the streets as well. Through the past 3 years, the research held a series of lectures, seminars, archival research, and collaborated with schools around the world.
Beatriz seeks to give evidence into a set of actionable insights which should question, provoke, and inspire the future of architectural education. She reframes architecture, its teaching, and its engagement with society by also presenting the way it was taught and it was criticized and changed by faculty members of the institutions. Summer workshops were held in International Laboratory of Architecture and Urban Design by Giancarlo De Carlo and members of Team X. Institute of Architecture and Urban Studies, also the Texas Rangers experiment at the University of Texas School of Architecture in 1951-58, design studios by Robert Venturi and Dennis Scott Brown, and the pedagogy with Charles Moore at Yale in the 70s, learning from Levittown and learning from Las Vegas. The Universitas project in 1972, announcing contributions by Michael Foucault Octavio. Through this research, the education of the architect generates alternative intellectual, political, technical, and aesthetic visions for the field of architecture. Radical Pedagogies is a work in progress in which the architectural history and theory is taught and practiced as an experiment in itself, exploring the potential of collaboration and individual work and addressing the contemporary challenges and opportunities in media. Of course, you have questions since Beatriz was not here, so we decided to ask a few students from our AAT program in order to talk if their studio is related to Radical Pedagogies and how do they see their studio as a way of addressing radical education.
I was part of the Jeffrey Johnson studio, which tried to reanalyze Rockefeller Center and to propose a new metropolitan image for the existing site. So in a way, we tried to look for a radical point of perspective towards the city, but the methodology of the studio itself was not radical according to my perspective.
Hi, I was in the Umemoto studio, and I'm not sure if my studio was radical or not. It was for sure form-based, which was a thing that I never ever tried before, but it was actually really different from the other studios in terms of putting form more important than the function itself. It was about an airport which existed in the middle of nowhere without any context or space or time. So it was, I think, really different from the others, but in terms of social or political interventions, I think it was quite weak.
I would have liked that instead of looking towards theory to create an urban manifesto, we could explore different territories and thus create a more varied result. And
If I could change something about my studio, I think I would change the structure of like the methodology and stuff, because although it was form-based, I think the studio tutor wanted a certain form, so we were following it through. So it wasn't really experimental and like it wasn't really research-based. But I think if we started from contextual research and then went on with it, I think the outcomes would be really different from what we have right now.
After attending the lecture of Beatriz Colomina, don't you agree that we should rethink the methodology of architecture? It feels like Beatriz about architecture becoming stale is somehow true, and architects are waiting for instructions or an activist engagement.
But yeah, that's true. Like the fact of them waiting for these instructions is already the problem itself.
Yeah, it's true, I agree. And from my point of view, curricular structures have hardly changed nowadays, despite all these transformations that have been taking place with the growth of globalization, new technologies and information culture.
Yeah, that's true. It seems like the research tries to wake things up here and there, but it's also timid at the end.
It's true that there is no real innovation.
Well, they're making this research. They try to show what they change and what they actually want to transform education. They shake the foundation of the architecture, and then they revisit the stuff that happened in the 70s and how these events made a huge impact on the architectural design. And they also make us think about our education, our methods of dealing with architecture. But the lecture that they gave in GSAPP was a bit timid, so in a way they couldn't answer the questions about what to expect from radical pedagogies these days, and or even discuss how these events change the architectural studies in nowadays.
Yeah, that's why we started to investigate some of our AAT students.
Yeah, we went and asked them a couple of questions just to get more familiar with their opinion and how radical pedagogies affects the studio and what do they think about that. That's true.
Yeah, so after these questions we realized that it is hard to address the effects that radical pedagogies have nowadays, but revisiting these events of 60s and 70s, and we think that it is better to evaluate our work or our profession and not necessarily changing it, but see it from another perspective, and to exactly figure out what are the drawbacks and the positive effects of these transformations. We should think outside of the box, and the systems that we should create should be based on a human, social and political scale, and not be drawn in a self-imposed bureaucratic oversight, ignoring any experimental practices or failures.
Yeah, that's true. It seems that the article was a bit nostalgic, and maybe this nostalgia was part of the problem, that they didn't let them go further and respond to all of these questions and issues that were asked about. And maybe Colomina seems to embrace a lot of non-criticable facts, so she offers a platform of only questions but not so much of answers. Maybe reformulating forms of reaction and interaction in design studies or academic structure of architecture itself will lead us to rethink and produce new pedagogies. But who better to respond to this question none other than Beatriz Colomina in her last lecture at the KTH School of Architecture in February 2015, where she was asked about the 70s, and she answered on how these issues are still alive and relevant nowadays.
So let's see the video.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there are two things here. One is that there is a real resonance between what was happening in the 70s and what is happening now. Already when looking at the little magazines, we realized that all the themes that we are interested in today are the themes that they were interested in. New technologies, civilian protests, which, this is the time of Occupy Wall Street, etc., right? So there was also this aspect, preoccupation with the environment, and then all the investigation that went in the 70s during the oil crisis into architecture, into new materials, into conservation of energy, they stopped. So it's not like it was a continuous until now. It's that we didn't think about that for a long, long time, and now it became pressing again. So many of these things that were radical at that time, They disappear entirely from the curriculums. They became unimportant. They became not part of the kind of experimentation that was taking place in those years have not happened for the longest time.